Hello and welcome back to the channel. As always, I'm your host, Morgan. Today you're going to need to get your favorite snowflake hot beverage choice ready because we're going to be talking about more damage that the Trump administration has done to the world of environmental protections in the form of a new rule that has just been passed through the Environmental Protection Agency, also known as the EPA. So grab your snowflake drinks. Let's get ready to do this. The rule in question we're going to be talking about today is titled Strengthening Transparency in Pivotal Science Underlying Significant Regulatory Actions and Influential Scientific Information. Oh boy, is that a whole bunch of word salad. Especially coming from a government agency, we shouldn't be too surprised here. So let's talk about kind of what it's supposed to do. Now, on the surface, this rule is supposed to say that, hey, any science that we use to influence environmental regulations that are going to be put into place has to be available to the public, and we have to cite our sources. That sounds like a good thing on the surface, but when you get into this 93-page document and into the reporting on it and into the letter from scientists, doctors, and other influential agencies refuting it and begging the EPA to not push this rule and not schedule it to be put into effect, what this whole 93 pages of word salad does is allows the EPA to redefine a bunch of things, like what publicly available data is, what data is, and other things such as that. We're not going to get into every single point of it, but we're going to discuss one of the massive problems that actually is the thing that makes this rule so detrimental to future environmental protections. One is that it allows the EPA to define what it says pivotal science is, and doesn't necessarily allow these scientific institutions to weigh in on what is and is not a pivotal scientific development, meaning that a pivotal scientific development, if the EPA says, nah, it's not pivotal, then they're not allowed to take it into consideration now in their enaction of policies that regulate how we protect the environment, how we deal with pollution, which in itself also is one of the ways we deal with the health of the population, because pollution's a big deal and makes people sick, not just the environment sick. But I digress. The big thing is that this rule is directly making it more difficult for these new environmental regulations to be put into place in the future. And the point where it specifically makes it the most difficult is on page 44, where they're talking about what publicly available access to data to studies is. Now, in the first iteration of this rule, it was very vague what they meant by that. And there were some commenters that they do mention in the ruling. The reason the document's so long is because they do reference commenters and specific things. Is that publicly available should include sources like journals that you have to pay for access to the meat and potatoes of the studies. Because in general, these journals that do have these subscriptions do require you to pay if you're not accessing them through an institution like a university or through a government agency. These are the respected journals. These are the journals with the best science out there for the most part. Now, the whole issue of science needing to be more accessible to the public is an entirely different issue that we're not going to really talk about today. The quick and dirty of it is, yeah, I do think science should be more accessible, and we shouldn't have these massive paywalls for like $40 for access to an article that could be revolutionary to how an entire field works. But again, this is not what we're discussing here. The EPA does not agree that publicly available includes access to these journals because they're restricted sources. Which basically means if the science that would advise some regulation being put into place is published in a journal that is considered restricted access behind like these paywalls and things, they're not gonna consider it, because this new rule, it has to be publicly available, all the data. And that's also a bit of an issue because their definition of data is still rather vague. And when I was reading through that section, my small brain cannot really grasp what that whole bunch of nothing said. Basically, the gist of it is that they're trying to say that if they say, oh, that's not data, or you haven't included access to all of your data, then they're not going to consider it, and the science can't be considered. So I do think that our government, when they're making these regulations and policies, should be very clear about which studies they're using. They should cite their freaking sources. You can go back to previous videos I've made about policies being enacted by our government that they don't cite any sources. That I'm just like, I would love to know what the best science you're using for this monarch butterfly thing is, but you don't cite what freaking source you use, so I can't really refute your interpretation of a study. But I digress. So this is just, it's redefining what the EPA is allowed to look at as far as science goes. Yes, I do think they should be citing their sources so that the public can at least go see what studies they use. Because even in these journals with the restricted access, you can still read the abstracts to these studies. You can still get a gist of what was done in the study. While, no, you might not be able to look at all of this raw data and the tables and graphs they came up with. You can still read what their question was, what they did, what their conclusion ultimately was in the couple hundred words of the abstract, and then decide if you're going to read the entire article yourself or not. Because in general, the public is not going to need the data and methods. That's going to be over their head anyway. Hell, if I go read a scientific study that's not necessarily from a field that I'm familiar with, all of the data section and results section is probably going to be pretty technical for me, and I'm going to struggle with that article more than I would with, say, an ecology article where I'm already comfortable with the methods they used. I've used RStudio, I've used the software. And that's coming from someone who has spent a lot of time studying in a scientific field. So again, this rule is concerning, and it's another rule in a chain of damaging things done by the Trump administration to dismantle our environmental protections. I mean, what can we really, can we be shocked at this point when Trump put someone in charge of the Interior and the EPA who has publicly stated that they wanted to dismantle the EPA? I mean, look at that record over the 4 years. That's not surprising. But one of the other things that has happened also in this very short period of time that comes alongside this rule is that future clean air regulations and future considerations for like these pollution and all the rules that have to do with that, they're now allowed to essentially prioritize the cost of how much the regulation will be over any health and environmental benefit, which is a problem in and of itself. So that and this ruling next to each other are very concerning, and they're going to be a very difficult thing for the Biden administration to nullify and get rid of. Chewbacca. Hey, the ducks don't want to play with you, buddy. So while, yeah, we can get past this rule can be taken away, it can be changed, it can be amended, because some of the ideas in it are not necessarily all bad, like the citing sources. That's not all bad. I think that sources should always be freaking cited. People should be able to go back and read what you looked at and make their own interpretation and decide whether or not they agree with you. However, this question of if the raw data is not available to the public, the EPA can't consider it, is concerning. The letter to the EPA that I have linked down below, as well as the ruling itself and an article about everything, is very much worth reading. That does bring up other concerns, because in some cases the raw data contains confidential information that should not be released to the public, because a lot of times in studies they use like medical information from people who have voluntarily allowed their medical charts to be used in a study. So that's stuff that should remain confidential, but that's also raw data that if it's not released to the public, the EPA is now saying it doesn't have to consider that scientific source because it's not being transparent enough. So we have a difficult future for environmental protections moving forward right now, but I am at least hopeful that these harmful rules are going to be at least amended, at best go away entirely and replaced with something else. But that has more to be seen at this point. This is another thing that I'm going to keep an eye on, that I will make sure I post updates on as soon as we have them. Until then, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, afternoon, evening, what have you, and I will see you all in the next one.
Thank you again for watching this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and ring that bell if you would like to see more. And if you'd like to follow me on any of my other social medias, the links are down in the description below. Don't forget to check out thereptilegoth.com for all of my articles and blog posts. If you found any value in this video and you would like to help support the channel, please check out my Patreon page. That link is also in the description down below. And a special thanks goes out to my Diamond Dragon patron, Diane V. What you're doing is really helping me fund a dream here. I will see you guys all in the next one.